Now, Trump, on the inflation side, got a little bit of a signal of, okay, you're doing the right thing. The ceasefire brought down inflation, but now there's no ceasefire anymore. So I think we can probably expect that number to start to rise again. So that's what I'm talking about, Mark. Look, I think the economy has been incredibly resilient, but it is in spite of, not because of, Trump's policies that frankly have added to costs for Americans.
What the president's been trying to do, Abby, as it relates to tariffs and other policies, are to level the playing field. It's long-term gain for some short-term inflationary pressure, and I think for everyone.
Wait, what do you mean leveling the playing field? Who is paying the tariffs?
Yeah. In today's video, Abby Phillip destroys Marc LoPresti on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as they clash over Donald Trump's new tariffs and the struggling U.S. economy. As Marc LoPresti defends the administration, Abby Phillip pushes back with tough questions. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip shuts down Marc LoPresti on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
It is always confounding to me when Trump is in a position where he needs to take some pressure off the economy. He keeps adding more bricks on the back of the economy, and I truly do not understand the logic, but I don't know, maybe I see it.
Okay. I kind of respectfully disagree with some of the fundamental premises there, Abby. I mean, the economy is actually doing quite well. We're in the middle of another earnings season where earnings are beating on average expectations. That makes the 9th earnings quarter over quarter in a row of earnings that have beat expectations on average.
You're talking about
corporations.
Are you talking about
corporations are doing great.
But that's an indication of how the economy is doing.
I would say the family that's going to fill up a gallon of gas that's over $4 from where it was in May does not feel
And the
that
corollary
way.
to that on the consumer side is that inflation has outpaced earnings for the last 2 months. Now, Trump, on the inflation side, got a little bit of a signal of, okay, you're doing the right thing. The ceasefire brought down inflation, but now there's no ceasefire anymore. So I think we can probably expect that number to start to rise again. So that's what I'm talking about, Mark. Look, I think the economy has been incredibly resilient, but it is in spite of, not because of, Trump's policies that frankly have added to costs for Americans.
What the president's been trying to do, Abby, as it relates to tariffs and other policies, are to level the playing field. It's long-term gain for some short-term inflationary pressure, and I think for everyone.
Wait, what do you mean leveling the playing field? Who is paying the tariffs?
The playing field needs to be level.
The tariffs get shifted to the consumer, which are Americans who buy goods from countries that are being taxed, like Canada or Mexico.
So
tell me how that makes sense for American families.
The last 3 quarters of corporate earnings have not demonstrated that.
You're talking about corporate earnings, which is very different from a family living in, let's say, Michigan, who is going to their gas pump to maybe fill up either diesel or gas, and they are seeing higher gas prices, higher diesel prices, and then they go to the grocery store. So on top of the higher gas prices, then they get the gift of driving to the grocery store to see grocery prices higher, because guess what diesel does? It takes the goods coming off of those trucks and gets it to the grocery store. So yes, those supermarkets or the corporations might be getting a higher earning paycheck here, but the average family is not.
But that's not the message that I'm trying to transmit here. So in breaking down corporate earnings reports since Liberation Day, corporations have reported by and large that they are not raising prices and passing the costs of
That's not true. They absolutely are. Grocery prices are higher.
I spend most of my days pouring.
Well, I would say, look, first of all, I do think that some corporations, the larger ones, are able to absorb some of the costs, but some of the costs are still being passed on.
While corporate earnings can be a useful economic indicator, they do not always reflect what ordinary families experience every day. A company can post record profits while consumers continue paying more for groceries, gasoline, rent, insurance, and utilities. That is why many economists distinguish between overall economic growth and household purchasing power. When wages fail to keep pace with rising living costs, people naturally feel the economy is weaker, regardless of what quarterly earnings reports suggest. Another important factor is that tariffs rarely exist in isolation. Research on previous rounds of tariffs found that at least some of the added costs were passed on through higher prices, even when larger corporations absorbed part of the expense. Smaller businesses often have less room to absorb those costs because they operate on thinner profit margins. As a result, higher import costs can spread throughout supply chains, affecting manufacturers, retailers, and ultimately the prices consumers pay. Energy prices also remain a major driver of inflation. Higher fuel costs increase the expense of transporting food, medicine, and everyday goods. At the same time, global conflicts, shipping disruptions, and uncertainty in energy markets can keep those costs elevated, making it harder for families to find financial relief. That is why this debate matters beyond political messaging. Most voters judge the economy by what they see in their own bank accounts, not by stock market gains or corporate earnings. If everyday necessities continue becoming more expensive, confidence naturally declines. Policymakers must focus not only on promoting economic growth, but also on ensuring its benefits reach working families. Until household budgets begin to feel meaningful relief, many Americans will remain unconvinced that the economy is truly moving in the right direction.
And when it comes to grocery prices, that's where the Iran war starts to come into play, because you've got fertilizer and nutrient and some of the basic fundamentals of farming going through that part of the world. That's not going to get resolved anytime soon. Right. And that's part of the picture that Americans are facing.
No, I think that's absolutely right. You mentioned Liberation Day. I think part of the issue with the tariffs in particular and Trump's desire to keep going back to this well is that they've been instituted, they've been repealed. There is profound uncertainty. I don't know that it is at all obvious that the tariffs have a great deal to do with corporate earnings as we've seen them. And importantly, there is a great deal of uncertainty about the tech sector, which has been a huge driver of those corporate earnings. And there are big questions about the future for NVIDIA, for Anthropic, for OpenAI, for Tesla and SpaceX. SpaceX goes out with this boom and is suddenly trading below what it opened at. Those are huge, huge red flags. There's lots and lots of concern out there. And the fact that consumer sentiment is already flagging while corporate earnings and people are continuing the message about, actually, the economy is good, actually. It seems like any moment you have politicians and pundits who are saying things are actually pretty good, when in fact people feel otherwise, is probably not a good moment.
Joe Biden's
the widespread nature of the dissatisfaction is going to be a real issue here. For Trump, his handling of all these issues is deeply underwater among in this poll of registered voters. His job as president, 61% disapprove. Inflation, 73% disapprove. That's an amazing number. 67% disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. 66% disapprove of his handling of the Iran war. And even immigration, 57% disapprove. Americans are also reporting that the costs are causing them serious hardship. 34% say a serious hardship. That's up 8 points from a year ago. There is a real problem, and we've talked about this. I mean, some of it is just, how do people feel? How do people feel? Yes. But I also think that people don't like going backwards. They don't like taking a step back. And where they were a year and a half ago, the day before Donald Trump was inaugurated, by all these different measures, inflation was lower, gas prices were lower. That's what they're looking at, and they're saying, this is not what we're supposed to be doing here.
And the easiest thing that you can point to and say, wow, I'm paying too much for this thing, is if you're driving and you see the gas prices, because that is just, it is the number one, the simplest thing to see. It's advertised on the highway. You see it when you fill up your tank. This is politically challenging, 100%. And we're talking about that question of the feelings. All of the sentiment indicators that we have, if there was an interesting study on some of the kind of forward-looking sentiment from studies coming out of the University of Michigan, and right around 2020 to 2022, the predictive value of those in politics just diverged. The question of whether or not we're living in a vibe session, where again, unemployment rate is fine. It is right near target. Inflation is, it's higher than we'd like it to be, but it's nowhere near the levels that we saw even 4 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. Right? So the way in which our registers are unable to account for, we'd like this to be better, but again, it's been much worse.
While it's true that some economic indicators remain relatively stable, voters rarely judge the economy by charts or quarterly reports. They judge it by what happens when they swipe their credit card at the grocery store or fill up their gas tank. If those everyday expenses keep rising, it's understandable why many Americans feel the economy is moving in the wrong direction, even if unemployment remains low or corporate profits stay strong. Another issue is uncertainty. Businesses can usually adapt to higher costs if they know the rules will stay the same. But when tariff policies are announced, delayed, changed, or expanded within short periods, companies often postpone hiring, investment, and long-term planning. That uncertainty can ripple through supply chains, affecting prices long before the full impact of any tariff is actually felt. Economists have repeatedly noted that policy uncertainty alone can slow business investment and reduce consumer confidence. Energy prices also deserve attention because they influence nearly every sector of the economy. Higher fuel costs don't just affect drivers, they increase shipping expenses for retailers, farmers, manufacturers, and food distributors. Those costs eventually show up in grocery bills and everyday necessities, making inflation feel much more personal than any government report suggests. At the end of the day, people compare today's prices with what they were paying a year ago, not with historical averages from decades earlier. If families consistently feel their paycheck buys less each month, perception follows experience, and experience starts with the cost of everyday living. That reality ultimately shapes elections more than statistics ever will.
That's not great. But there's no sense, we're unable to get that calibration. I think that's the frustrating thing, is the understanding of, well, what would the alternative be? If the other party was in office, well, let's just see, right?
Well,
we didn't like this guy, so let's
play that out. Let's play out the thought experiment. What would the economy have been if Trump were elected, but he had not instituted Liberation Day tariffs? He had not gone down that road. He had not launched into the war in Iran. And that is actually the counterfactual that I think a lot of Americans are thinking of. They voted for Trump thinking that he would kind of build on the progress that was being made. And then he made some really key decisions that they strongly disagree with, and that is what you're seeing in these.
I think if Trump, I think to the point that you made of just if he had not taken all these steps with tariffs, the war, all of this administration would be looking very confident going into the midterms with a very, very strong economy. And to all of your points, I think you're pointing out the fact that inflation is sort of on target, unemployment is sort of on target. The problem is, and this is something that we wrestled with in the Biden administration, is we told people, but the economy is doing really well. But it turns out when people but the economy after the pandemic was coming back and was doing better, and we told people that. And the problem is that when you tell people that, they need to trust you that it is going to continue to get better. And to your point, they drive by the groceries, they drive by the gas station, they're on the highway, and they see those prices. Then they go to the grocery store, they get their electric bills. It's just not a reality for people.
The consumers have no patience, unfortunately. There's no economic patriotism. There's no sense in these modern times of okay, this sucks right now. My wish list was I wish groceries were down. I agree with all of that.
I think Americans are asking, why on earth do I need to sacrifice in this moment? I think that's a fair question too.
Energy prices also deserve attention because they influence nearly every sector of the economy. Higher fuel costs don't just affect drivers, they increase shipping expenses for retailers, farmers, manufacturers, and food distributors. Those costs eventually show up in grocery bills and everyday necessities, making inflation feel much more personal than any government report suggests. At the end of the day, people compare today's prices with what they were paying a year ago, not with historical averages from decades earlier. If families consistently feel their paycheck buys less each month, perception follows experience, and experience starts with the cost of everyday living. That reality ultimately shapes elections more than statistics ever will. Energy prices also deserve attention because they influence nearly every sector of the economy. Higher fuel costs don't just affect drivers, they increase shipping expenses for retailers, farmers, manufacturers, and food distributors. Those costs eventually show up in grocery bills and everyday necessities, making inflation feel much more personal than any government report suggests. At the end of the day, People compare today's prices with what they were paying a year ago, not with historical averages from decades earlier. If families consistently feel their paycheck buys less each month, perception follows experience, and experience starts with the cost of everyday living. That reality ultimately shapes elections more than statistics ever will. Energy prices also deserve attention because they influence nearly every sector of the economy. Higher fuel costs don't just affect drivers, they increase shipping expenses for retailers, farmers, manufacturers, and food distributors. Those costs eventually show up in grocery bills and everyday necessities, making inflation feel much more personal than any government report suggests. At the end of the day, people compare today's prices with what they were paying a year ago, not with historical averages from decades earlier. If families consistently feel their paycheck buys less each month, perception follows experience, and experience starts with the cost of everyday living. That reality ultimately shapes elections more than statistics ever will. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.